All right, so this will be a bit of a breakup from the conversation, but it is something I want to ask you because I think it's that valuable that I want people to hear it. And it's the distinction you make between the having mode and having needs, and the being mode and being needs.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is one where, look, I have a guy that comes along to the meetup and watches this with me. Very, very smart guy, very well educated. He works in some sort of psychological capacity with people who have various problems, and he takes transformation seriously from every level of analysis: physiological, psychological, spiritual. But even this distinction for him, I think, was like a light bulb moment in terms of, well, it's such a simple way to articulate something so fundamental about what we are that speaks importantly to where we are often going wrong in current culture. So if you would, please, the having mode and the being mode, I'd love for you to tell us about that.
Thank you. So the idea is drawn from Eric Fromm, his book, To Have and to Be. But and Fromm is clear about this. He doesn't think he's the originator of this distinction. You can find analogous distinctions in many places. Stephen Batchelor has a version of this distinction in his book, Alone with Others, An Existential Interpretation of Buddhism. You can find something analogous in Gabriel Marcel. So, right, and I think even you could understand parts of what Heidegger is doing using this distinction. But I think Fromm, and the reason why I use Fromm's ways of talking about it, although I supplement it a bit with Buber and with Collingwood, right? I think that it's a very clear and concise way of talking about it. So Fromm's idea is that, right, first of all, we have to get this notion of an existential mode, right? So when I'm talking about an existential mode, I'm talking about this process of co-identification, right? I'm always assuming a particular identity in order to exercise my agency, and I'm projecting onto the world a set of identities in order to make that world an intelligible arena for my action. And so those, yes. And this is also related to, Clifford Geertz's work on worldviews, yes. Right? But that deep participatory relationship, the way they co-define, yes. And co-create each other.
Yes.
Okay, that's the existential mode. And yes. That what Fromm was pointing out is we have two fundamentally different existential modes. And these modes, these agent arena co-fitting relationships, are organized around different sets of needs we have. And so the having needs are needs that are met by having things, exercising control over them, often ultimately consuming them, like oxygen, food, water, or at least having really intimate control over them, like shelter, etc., right? And then Fromm's notion is, well, those are, first of all, neither mode is right or wrong, okay?
Yes.
But the having mode is right. It's a legitimate mode because we do have these needs. There's things we literally have to consume and have power and control over, or we cease to be.
Yes.
And then he said, and then, cool. And then he asked a really good question. He's like, what is your cognitive machinery like, right? And what's your existential mode like in order to facilitate solving this? Well, he says, well, what you do is and here I'll use some Collingwood ideas to make it a little bit clearer. But what I do is I give things a categorical identity. Like this is a glass, mm-hmm. Right? And so I can quickly and efficiently know how to get control over it and manipulate it because I can put it into a category and I can use the way in which it's similar to all the other glasses and the way I could replace this with another glass. So all of that, I assign a categorical identity, and then that tells you what my relationship is to it. My relationship is one of, what Fromm calls like animal intelligence. That's not an insult, by the way, mm-hmm. Right? It means my tremendous capacity to manipulate things in the world in order to solve my having needs. Mm-hmm. So I have an I-it relationship, yes. To things, to use an idea from Buber. Now, then Fromm pointed out, but we have a different set of needs. He calls them being needs. I sometimes think that it might be more accurate to call them becoming needs or developmental needs.
Yes.
So we have a need to be mature. We have a need to become mature, to develop maturity. We have a need to, become virtuous. We need to, we have a need to become authentic. These are things we need to become. So these needs are not met by controlling or manipulating. These are needs that are met through, and this goes back to something we were talking about not that long ago. These needs are met by going through important developmental transformations.
Yes.
In really important ways, coming up with ways in which we overcome that existential inertia, that existential ignorance, and fundamentally go through a process of self-transcendence. And so the being needs are met, therefore, by a different framework of cognition, because now I'm not primarily trying to solve problems in the sense of come up with an answer of how to quickly get my goal. Instead, what I'm trying to do is connect myself to reality, like to the reality of who I am and the reality out there, so that I can get this reciprocal realization, so that I and the world can co-transform, the agent and the arena can co-transform, so that I become a different cognitive agent. So my relationship now is not one of animal intelligence, it's one of reflective reason, where reason is this process by which we take ourselves. So when I use reason, I'm not talking about syllogistic argumentation. I'm talking about this process by which we put ourselves through, right, development in order to enhance and optimize our capacities with respect to the world. So because I'm engaged in this project, right, of making meaning, because that's what reason is doing for me, right, and going through this developmental change, I don't have an I-it relationship to things. I want to be connected to things so that I can penetrate to their mystery, right, and the mystery that's still within me. See, the mystery is that developmental affordance, right, for these kinds of transformations and self-transcendences that are needed for the being mode. So I have an I-thou relationship, right? To use Buber, and my interaction with things is not categorically but expressively. So I'll often use this point, right? Presumably, and this is, I think I share this with people, that's my presumption, your relationship to a deep friend or your romantic partner is a developmental relationship of reciprocal realization. You're both affording each other's growth and disclosure of depth, both within yourself and within the arena of your life. Right? Yes. And so your relationship to your partner or to your deep friend is not an I-it categorical manipulative relationship. I wouldn't say to my partner, I wouldn't say to her, I'm with you because you remind me so readily of all the other women I've ever been with. That gives me information so that I can efficiently and effectively manipulate you and control you in order to, service my needs. Yes. Like that is not making this relationship go well. I'm destroying the relationship, because that is not why she has entered into this relationship, right? She's not entered into it to solve a problem, to have control over resources. She's entered into it to become a different person. And that is, of course, why I've also entered into it. So here's the issue then. Both modes are legitimate. What Fromm, and I would argue, and this is what Stephen Batchelor argues, what Buddhism and many things are talking about is modal confusion. When we confuse, when we pursue, right, we use the wrong mode to pursue the needs we're pursuing. And the classic example that Fromm uses is we pursue the being needs from within the having mode. So that, in order to become mature, we have a car. In order to be in love, we have lots of sex, right? And so what we and Fromm's point, right, is that confusion serves other people in their capacity to exploit and manipulate us. Because if I can keep you trapped in the having mode, you are, of course, are being frustrated. And I mean that in a deep existential and psychological sense. You're being frustrated in your attempt to satisfy your being needs. So what will you do? You're trapped in the having mode, and having the car isn't doing it. So it must mean that I don't have the right car, or I've got to get a new car, or a new iPhone, or I've got to get more likes. I have to have more likes on my social media. Yes. And so you pursue this with an increasing frenzy. And then Fromm predicts there's two responses to that. Like the futility and the frustration bifurcate, and you either fall into a kind of deep despair, or that frustration and futility reaches out in the only way in which you feel you can again reconnect to reality, which is sort of a violent, reaction, anger, and attacking those around you, because that's sort of the last resort you have to at least reconnect to reality in
Yes.
some fundamental way. So the modal confusion is a profound way in which we can be deceived, and that deception also makes us quite exceptionally vulnerable to manipulation by others.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for taking us through that. I think it's incredibly valuable.